Most operate under the illusion that the volume of movement dictates the speed of arrival. They measure life in sweat and hours, yet find themselves standing in the same psychological geography, wondering why the horizon never changes despite their frantic pace. It is a quiet, systemic error to believe that the world responds to what you do, rather than the silent frequency from which you act. True gravity does not struggle to attract. It simply exists as a fixed point around which everything else is forced to orbit, yet most people spend their lives spinning in the void, disconnected from their own center. There is a subtle, lethal tension in the act of chasing. To pursue is to declare, with every fiber of your being, that the object of your desire is currently absent, thereby cementing that absence into your immediate reality through a law of inverted pursuit. This creates a friction that no amount of discipline can overcome, turning your very effort into a mechanical barrier that keeps your objectives at a distance. You have sensed this resistance before, that invisible wall that appears precisely as you accelerate, unaware that it is a direct architecture of your own internal displacement. Reality does not possess the agency to deny you. It is merely a cold, automated reflection of your internal position. When your center of gravity is anchored in the reactions of others or the fluctuations of the environment, you relinquish the role of the cause and become a mere effect, a leaf subject to every passing wind. This lack of internal coherence creates a distortion in the field around you, ensuring that every external victory is hollow and every setback feels permanent. The world is not testing your resolve. It is simply obeying the laws of your own mental geometry with absolute mathematical precision. You have not lost years to bad luck or insufficient intelligence, though the weight of those repetitions feels like a heavy debt. You have simply been operating within a state of being that was inherently incapable of producing a different sequence of events. To believe you could have forced a different outcome without shifting your internal coordinates is to argue with the fundamental laws of nature. The delay you have experienced was never a punishment or a failure of will, but a precise response to a signal that has remained unchanged until this moment. Few will ever recognize the silent mechanism that organizes the distribution of power and autonomy, as they are too busy reacting to the shadows on the wall. Most will continue to bleed energy into a vacuum, fighting obstacles that are merely symptoms of their own misalignment. To perceive this law is to step beyond the reach of external control, and to understand that sovereignty is found only in the stillness of absolute internal coherence. What follows is not a lesson to be memorized, but the necessary restoration of an order you have spent a lifetime unknowingly resisting. The visible world is a graveyard of wasted motion, populated by those who believe that the volume of their struggle is a direct currency for their success. Observe the millions who rise before the sun, their minds saturated with the frantic scripts of survival, convinced that the accumulation of physical fatigue is the only valid prerequisite for the arrival of abundance. They measure their worth by the weight of their exhaustion and the complexity of their schedules. Yet they remain tethered to the same socioeconomic and emotional coordinates year after year after year. There is a profound, silent tragedy in the realization that most human effort is not a bridge to a new reality, but a sophisticated reinforcement of the current one. This is not a failure of character, nor is it a lack of intellect. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between force and flow, where the individual believes they are fighting the world, when they are actually fighting the very reflection they are projecting into it. Consider the scholar who consumes endless volumes of strategy, the entrepreneur who works 20 hours a day, and the seeker who attends every seminar, yet finds that their bank account and their peace of mind remain in a state of perpetual stagnation. They are operating under the heavy illusion that information plus perspiration equals transformation. They treat life as a fortress to be besieged, unaware that the gates are locked from the inside by a mechanism they refuse to acknowledge. Without a shift in the underlying state, all action is merely a frantic rearrangement of the furniture in a burning house. The noise of their activity serves only to drown out the quiet, persistent signal of their own failure, creating a feedback loop of effort and disappointment that eventually hardens into a cynical acceptance of their own limitations. It is a quiet, systemic error to believe that the world responds to what you do, rather than the silent frequency from which you act. This friction is a primary characteristic of the misaligned life, a constant sense of pushing against a reality that seems determined to push back with equal or greater intensity. You have felt this resistance in the moments when an opportunity seemed within reach, only to dissolve at the final second for reasons that appeared entirely external. You blamed the economy, the timing, or the betrayals of others, refusing to see that these were merely the convenient costumes worn by a reality that was simply obeying your internal command for delay. When the internal mechanism is misaligned, every step forward is taken with the mental brakes fully engaged, leading to a life that feels like a constant uphill struggle against an invisible wind. This wind is not an act of fate. It is the pressure generated by the vacuum of your own internal inconsistency, a vacuum that reality rushes to fill with more of the same resistance you are projecting. Why is it that two individuals can perform the exact same actions, follow the same blueprints, and speak the same words, yet one is met with an open path while the other is met with a wall of glass? The difference is never found in the visible labor, but in the invisible gravity of their respective centers. The one who struggles is often trying to prove something to a world they perceive as hostile or indifferent, thereby confirming the hostility in every interaction. Their very effort is a confession of their perceived inadequacy, a signal that they do not belong in the reality they are trying to inhabit. Consequently, the world treats them as an intruder, a foreign body to be rejected, no matter how hard they work or how much they study. They are playing a game they cannot win because they have not realized that they are the one who wrote the rules of their own exclusion. The realization that begins to dawn is uncomfortable. You have been the architect of every barrier you have encountered. The missed connections, the financial plateaus, and the emotional volatility were not random glitches in the system, but precise manifestations of an internal state that could not possibly allow for a different result. You have been running a race on a track that loops back to the beginning, convinced that if you just ran faster, you would eventually reach a new destination. But the track is your own mind, and the loop is the unwavering consistency of your internal position. Until the position changes, the destination is a mathematical impossibility. You are not a victim of the world. You are the victim of a geometry you have failed to master, operating under a law that rewards alignment and punishes the desperate noise of the uncentered. Every action performed from a state of perceived lack is an affirmation of that lack, and therefore, it can only produce results that reflect a deficiency. When you work from a position of needing to succeed, you are broadcasting a signal of not having, and the cold, mechanical response of reality is to provide you with more not having. This is the origin of the signal that governs your life, a subterranean broadcast that overrides every spoken word and every conscious intention. It is why your most intense efforts often lead to the most spectacular failures. The intensity of the effort was proportional to the intensity of your fear that the result would not come. The universe does not hear your prayers or your goals. It only feels the weight of your internal presence, and it adjusts the landscape of your life to match that weight with absolute mathematical precision. The frequency of your intent is the silent commander of your external circumstances. Yet most people are completely deaf to their own internal noise. They believe their intent is to be wealthy, but their underlying signal is a terror of being poor. They believe their intent is to be respected, but their signal is a deep-seated belief that they are unworthy. This internal contradiction creates a distorted wave in the field around them, ensuring that the environment responds with instability and delay. It is like trying to drive a vehicle with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. The engine roars, the smoke rises, and the effort is immense, but the movement is negligible. This is the state of the average person, a roar of activity covering a profound immobility, a frantic dance designed to hide a central point of paralysis. This delay is not a denial from a higher power, but a mirror reflecting your own hesitation back at you in the form of time. Time is a buffer that reality uses to protect itself from your inconsistent commands. If the world responded instantly to every fleeting thought, it would collapse into chaos. Instead, it waits for a sustained, coherent signal before it begins to rearrange itself, and most people never provide that signal. They change their minds, their moods, and their methods 10 times a day, then wonder why the world remains stubbornly the same. The delay you experience is a direct measure of your own internal fragmentation, the visible distance between who you say you are and who you actually believe yourself to be in the silence of your own mind. You must begin to see that your hard work has often been a sophisticated form of hiding, a way to avoid the terrifying silence of looking at your own internal displacement. It is easier to work 18 hours a day than it is to sit for 1 hour and confront the fact that you do not trust yourself or the world. You use the noise of the external world to mask the incoherence of the internal one, hoping that if you stay busy enough, the results will eventually be forced to appear. But the field cannot be forced. It can only be inhabited. The results you seek are already present in the field, but they are invisible to you because you are looking for them through the lens of a state that is fundamentally misaligned with their existence. You are looking for light while wearing a blindfold of your own construction, complaining that the sun has refused to rise. The realization that your effort has been the very thing keeping your objectives at bay is the first crack in the prison wall. It is the beginning of the understanding that sovereignty is not earned through battle, but through the cessation of conflict. You have been at war with a reality that was only trying to be a faithful servant to your internal commands. And in that war, you have been your own greatest casualty. The signal you've been sending is a tangled mess of desire and doubt, and the world has been giving you exactly what you asked for, a tangled mess of opportunity and obstacle. To change the response, you do not change the action. You change the source of the command, the silent, unshakable center from which all action must eventually flow. The act of chasing is perhaps the most destructive behavior in the human repertoire. For the chase is to declare that the object of your desire is currently absent and moving away from you. This creates a declaration of poverty that the world is forced to honor, ensuring that the faster you run, the faster the horizon recedes. Every fiber of the chasing mind is focused on the distance between itself and the goal, and because the mind can only manifest what it focuses on, it manifests more distance. This is a law of inverted pursuit. That which is desperately pursued is inherently repelled, because the pursuit itself is a confession of lack. You have experienced this in the social realm, where the person who most needs approval is the one most likely to be ignored, and in the financial realm, where the desperate need for money seems to drive it further away. The friction of the wanting mind is a tangible force that closes the doors of the world, creating a wall of resistance that no amount of technique can pierce. When you want something, you are in a state of tension, a state of not having, which is a state of weakness. This tension creates a repulsion in the field, a subtle but powerful signal that warns others and the environment itself to stay away. It is the energy of the predator, and the world instinctively hides its treasures from those who approach with such hunger. The forest path is always the longest and most difficult path, not because it is the most rewarding, but because it is the path of greatest resistance, paved with the bricks of your own desperation and the mortar of your own insecurity. Every time you force a result, you reinforce the void that necessitated the force in the first place, creating a cycle of temporary gains followed by inevitable collapses. You may manage to secure a deal or a relationship through sheer willpower and manipulation, but because the internal state that generated the action was one of lack, the result will eventually crumble to match that state. This is why many who achieve sudden success find themselves losing it just as quickly. They change their circumstances, but they did not change their gravity. The external world eventually reasserts the internal order, dragging the person back down to the level of their own self-perception. You cannot outrun your own shadow, and you cannot outward a mind that believes it is fundamentally undeserving or incapable. The invisible field that repels what you most need is not an enemy to be conquered, but a boundary to be understood. It is the boundary of your own self-concept, the limit of what you can allow into your life without experiencing cognitive dissonance. If you believe life is a struggle, you will subconsciously sabotage every easy path that opens up, because the easy path feels threatening to your identity as a struggler. You will find a way to make it hard again, to restore the familiar friction that confirms you are who you think you are. You have been reinforcing the void not because you are incompetent, but because you are loyal to a version of yourself that requires the void to exist. The field is simply respecting your loyalty, providing you with a reality that matches your most deeply held, often unconscious, convictions. To stop chasing is not to stop moving. It is to change the direction of the movement from the external to the internal. It is to recognize that the pursuit of the out there is a distraction from the in here, where the real work of alignment takes place. When you withdraw the energy of desperation, the field begins to settle, and the repulsion begins to fade. You stop being a hunter and start being a center of gravity, a point of attraction that allows things to move toward you rather than away from you. This is the beginning of the shift from the physics of effort to the physics of resonance, where the world is no longer a target to be hit, but a mirror that reflects the quiet, unwavering certainty of your internal position. Reality is not a conscious entity that judges your worth or rewards your virtue. It is an automated mechanism, as cold and indifferent as the laws of motion or the behavior of light. It does not care how hard you work, how much you suffer, or how good a person you believe yourself to be. It only responds to the data of your internal state, processing your dominant thoughts and feelings into the physical architecture of your life. Like a calculator that does not care about the intentions of the mathematician, the universe simply performs the operations you provide it. If you input fear and lack, the output will always be scarcity and limitation, regardless of how much you beg for a different result. Understanding this mechanical nature is the key to liberation, for it removes the emotional weight of feeling wronged by life and replaces it with the cold clarity of a scientist observing a reaction. The mathematical precision of the reflection is absolute, leaving no room for the concept of luck, misfortune, or bad breaks. What you call luck is simply the moment when internal alignment meets a corresponding external opportunity. What you call misfortune is the moment when internal misalignment manifests as an external collision. There are no accidents in a system governed by law, only consequences that you have not yet traced back to their source. Every event in your life is a data point, a feedback signal telling you exactly where your center of gravity is currently located. If the results are consistently negative, it is not because the universe is against you, but because you are consistently providing the wrong inputs to the machine of reality. The fallacy of the virtuous person who fails while the unworthy person succeeds is a common source of resentment, yet it is easily explained by the law of mental gravity. Virtue, in the social sense, has no bearing on the laws of manifestation. A good person who feels fundamentally unworthy will fail, while a bad person who feels fundamentally sovereign will succeed. The universe does not reward morality. It rewards coherence. The unworthy person who succeeds has a center of gravity that is anchored in the expectation of success, and reality has no choice but to obey that expectation. Meanwhile, the virtuous person who struggles is often anchored in a sense of martyrdom or self-sacrifice, which reality also faithfully reflects back as a life of endless struggle and lack. Your internal anchor determines the external orbit of your life, deciding which people, opportunities, and events are allowed to enter your sphere and which are forced to remain outside. If your anchor is set in the shifting sands of external validation, your life will be a chaotic mess of highs and lows, subject to the whims of everyone around you. You will be emotionally controlled by anyone who can influence your self-perception, because your center of gravity is not within you, but in the hands of others. This is the ultimate form of slavery, to have your internal state dictated by the external reflection. To break this cycle, you must pull the anchor from the world and set it deep within the silent, unchanging core of your own being, where the opinions of the world cannot reach it. Why do some people seem to breeze through life, attracting wealth and influence with minimal apparent effort, while you grind yourself into the dust for a fraction of the return? It is because they have, either by birth or by accident, stumbled upon a state of internal coherence that makes them a natural center of gravity. They do not try to be successful. They simply exist in a state where success is the only logical outcome. They are not fighting the world. They are the world, and the world responds to them as a part of itself. They have mastered the geometry of their own minds, creating a field of attraction that draws in everything they need, while you are still trying to build a world with your bare hands, one brick of effort at a time. The weight of repetition is the most exhausting burden a human being can carry. The feeling of waking up in the same mental and emotional room day after day, despite having spent years trying to find the exit. You change your job, you change your partner, you move to a new city. Yet within a few months, the old patterns begin to reemerge like ghosts through the floorboards. The faces are different, but the dynamics are identical. The paycheck is larger, but the feeling of scarcity remains unchanged. This is because you have changed the scenery, but you have not changed the play. You are still the same actor, reading from the same internal script, and as long as the script remains, the performance will inevitably follow the same trajectory. This psychological geography is a map of your internal state, and no matter how far you travel in the physical world, you're always walking on the terrain of your own mind. If your mind is a landscape of lack and anxiety, you will find lack and anxiety in every corner of the globe. You are not trapped in a city, a job, or a relationship. You are trapped in a state of being that can only perceive and inhabit those specific environments. The repetitions in your life are not the result of a lack of willpower, but the result of the unwavering consistency of your internal coordinates. You are like a compass that always points north, regardless of how many times you turn the ship, until you recalibrate the needle. You will always be heading in the same direction. There is a debt that many carry, not a debt of money or of action, but debt of the previous state, the accumulated momentum of years of misaligned thinking and feeling. When you begin to shift your internal position, the old reality does not vanish instantly. It continues to play out its remaining energy, much like an engine that continues to spin after the ignition has been turned off. This is a period of testing, where most people lose heart and return to their old ways, convinced that the change didn't work. They do not realize that they are simply paying off the debt of their past state, and that if they remain steadfast in their new coherence, the old world will eventually run out of fuel and a new one will begin to take its place. The exhaustion of trying to change a mirror instead of the face is the primary cause of human burnout and despair. You spend your life trying to fix a reflection, manipulating people, chasing money, fighting symptoms, while the face in front of the mirror remains unchanged. It is a futile, maddening task that can only lead to a sense of powerlessness and cynicism. The mirror is not broken. It is working perfectly, reflecting your internal state with absolute fidelity. To try to change a reflection without changing the source is an act of insanity, yet it is the basis of almost all human endeavor. The moment you stop trying to fix the world and start focusing on the coherence of the one who perceives it, the world begins to fix itself without your intervention. The crushing weight of the status quo of the soul is the silent force that keeps most people in their place, a gravitational pull toward the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. You have built an identity around your struggles and your limitations, and though you claim to want to be free of them, a part of you is terrified of the void that would be left in their absence. This internal resistance is a true source of your stagnation, a hidden loyalty to the version of yourself that is small, struggling, and controlled. To break free, you must be willing to let that version of yourself die, to relinquish the comfort of your own suffering and step into a state of being that you do not yet know how to inhabit. This is the threshold of the real work, the place where the illusion of effort ends and the reality of alignment begins. It was never about your capacity, your intelligence, or your worthiness in the eyes of some external judge. It was always about the alignment of the internal mechanism. You have spent years blaming yourself for failures that were simply the inevitable result of a misaligned state, carrying a burden of guilt that has only served to further anchor you in the very reality you sought to escape. The relief of understanding this is profound, for it removes the personal sting of failure and replaces it with the realization that you are simply using the wrong tool for the task. You do not need to be better, more disciplined, or more deserving. You simply need to be more coherent. The struggle was never a reflection of your potential, only a reflection of your current position. This relief is often accompanied by a deep, uncomfortable realization. You have no one to blame for your life, but the internal state you have allowed to persist. The economy did not stop you. Your parents did not stop you, and your lack of resources did not stop you. You were stopped by the invisible boundaries of your own self-concept. This is a discomfort of total responsibility. The understanding that if you are the cause of your failure, you are also the only possible source of your success. It is a terrifying realization because it removes every excuse and every hiding place, leaving you alone with the silent commander of your own mind. But within that terror lies the only true freedom. For if the problem is internal, the solution is also within your absolute control. Sovereignty is found only in the stillness of absolute internal coherence, in the state where the signal you send to the world is clear, unified, and unwavering. When you reach this state, you are no longer emotionally controlled by the reactions of others or the fluctuations of the environment, because your center of gravity is fixed within the core of your own being. You become the cause rather than the effect, the observer rather than the observed, and the world begins to organize itself around your presence. This is not something you do. It is something you become by stripping away the layers of noise, contradiction, and desperation that have defined your life until now. The shift is subtle, yet its consequences are seismic, altering the very fabric of your reality. The discomfort of the truth is the price of admission to a new way of living, a price that most are unwilling to pay. They would rather continue the frantic, noisy dance of effort and disappointment than face the quiet, cold reality of their own internal misalignment. But you have reached a point where the old dance is no longer sustainable, where the way of the repetition has become more painful than the fear of the change. You are standing at the threshold of a portal that leads away from the world of force and into the world of power. But to cross it, you must leave behind everything you thought you knew about how the world works. You must be willing to be wrong about everything so that you can finally be right about the one thing that matters. There is a silence that precedes the shift, a moment of profound stillness where the old world has lost its grip, but the new one has not yet fully materialized. This is a space of potential, the vacuum that precedes the arrival of a new coherence. In this silence, you are neither the person you were nor the person you are becoming. You are simply the awareness that oversees the transition. The ground beneath you is shifting. The gravity is changing, and the old laws of effort and struggle are beginning to dissolve. You are not preparing for a lesson to be learned, but for a restoration of an order that has always been your birthright, an order that you are finally ready to inhabit. The fever of the chase begins to cool only when the hunter realizes he's been pursuing his own shadow. For years, you have mistaken the noise of your struggle for the signal of your progress, unaware that every frantic step forward was merely deepening the groove of your current displacement. The realization that the world has never been resisting you, but only reflected your own internal friction, marks the end of an era of wasted energy. You are no longer required to force the gates of a reality that was always designed to respond to your presence rather than your pressure. The shift from pursuit to position is not a technique to be practiced, but recognition that the center of gravity has finally returned to its rightful place within the architecture of your own being. To remain emotionally controlled by the fluctuations of the environment or the opinions of others is to admit that your internal anchor has no weight. True sovereignty does not shout for attention or demand respect. It exists as a fixed coordinate around which the chaos of the world is forced to reorganize. You have spent a lifetime allowing the tides of external events to dictate the temperature of your soul, yet now you perceive the invisible law that governs the shoreline. The external reflection is losing its power to agitate, because you have begun to inhabit a stillness that is deeper than the storm. This is a quiet transition from being an effect of the world to becoming the cause of your own experience, a state where your coherence acts as a silent command that reality has no choice but to obey. The rules you once thought were written in stone have dissolved into fluid mechanics of a mental geometry you are only just beginning to master. The delays that once felt like failures and the barriers that seemed like walls are now revealed as simple indicators of a signal that was previously fragmented. There is no longer a need to argue with the mirror or to plead with the reflection for a different outcome. You understand now that the only way to change the image is to alter the face that stands before it, and that any effort spent otherwise is a sophisticated form of self-delusion. This clarity brings with it a heavy, silent responsibility, for the map of your life is no longer a record of accidents, but a precise blueprint of your own internal consistency. Returning to the old state of frantic wanting and reactive fear is now a psychological impossibility, for you cannot unsee the mechanism once it has been revealed. To attempt to live under the old rules would be to knowingly induce a friction so intense that it would consume the very results you seek to achieve. The comfort of blame has been stripped away, leaving you in the cold, clear light of absolute autonomy. You are standing at a threshold where the only way forward is to deepen the alignment that has already begun to take hold of your perception. The bridge behind you has vanished into the mist of a past that no longer possesses a gravity to pull you back into its repetitive loops. For those who have recognized the frequency of this truth, the next step is not a choice, but a necessary unfolding of a new internal order. The movement toward total coherence requires a space where the noise of the world is filtered through the lens of this sovereign perspective. If the silence within you has begun to reorganize itself around these laws, the path toward reinforcing the state is the only one that remains visible. This is not an invitation to learn more, but a summons to inhabit the power you have spent a lifetime unknowingly avoiding. The sequence is already in motion, and the world is already adjusting its landscape to match the weight of the person you have finally decided to become. The mirror does not wait for you to move first.